Hi. What I'd like to talk about today is is to look at the process by which prophecy actually happens, what engenders prophecy, like how it happens, and then to look at some examples. We're going to look at Abraham, we're going to look at Shmuel, we're going to look at Shaul, and we're going to look at Elisha. Okay, I'm optimistic that we're going to get to Moshe, but as I'm talking, I'm kind of wondering out loud whether we're going to get to Moshe. I'd like to, so that we can start Moshe this week, do Moshe next week, and then the last week talk about Navi Sheker, which is a really weird kind of a thing, but it's an important thing to understand. So I think last week we talked about how the process of becoming a Navi is you go to Navi school. Like, the best way to describe it is kind of like Hogwarts. This is always the metaphor that I use. I don't know what metaphor I used before Harry Potter, but but it's an apprenticeship. It's a training process, and the Rambam, both in his Moreh Nevuchim and in his Yesodei HaTorah, he outlines it. I think we did a little bit of it last week, but basically what the Rambam says is that the process of becoming a Navi is as much a mental and emotional training process as, and now we're going to switch out of the Rambam, as becoming a marathoner or an Olympic athlete is a physical process, right? So I think we're very much aware of the process of training that an athlete, a superior athlete, be it a marathoner or an Olympian, what is involved in that training process. And if we're not aware, we can just Google, ESPN and all those, pre-Olympic little videos, which is what we really tune in to watch, because who cares about the 5 seconds of the luge run? The process is intense. There is, first of all, there are kind of 2 ways to become a Navi, just like there are 2 ways to become a wizard, or 2 ways to become an athlete. You're either born into a family of Nevi'im or wizards or athletes, or you are not, and then you train really, 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 really hard. So for example, when you hear a Navi referred to, for example, the Navi Zechariah, who is our last Navi in Tanakh, his name is Zechariah ben Iddo. The rule is, anytime somebody is named a Navi, the son of, and you hear another name, okay, that tells you that his father was also a Navi. So we know that Elisha, who we're going to talk about, is Elisha ben Shaphan. We know therefore that Shaphan was also a Navi. And so this is a case kind of you inherit that Navi gene, same way you would inherit an athletic gene, same way you would inherit a musical gene. It's a process of genetics. So typically, the children of Nevi'im were kind of scrutinized fairly early on for signs of Navi prodigiousness. I said that right? Much like, again, using the Harry Potter model, just because it works really, really well, right? When 2 wizards gave birth, didn't necessarily mean that the kid was a wizard, but then there's certain signs that you would look for. And the Gemara discusses the signs that you would look for. For example, the fact that Yosef had these wacko crazy dreams, and that the dreams were recorded. This was fairly typical, that if you had a kid who from a very young age started having these kinds of dreams or visions, right? That, I read this is in a fictional novel, but it really struck me as a good example of what the process would have been like. In the opening of the novel, there's a family with 3 sisters, and one sister wakes up when she's 7 years old in the morning, having dreamt of peaches and blueberries, I think. She can't understand why she had this incredibly vivid dream about peaches and blueberries. Later that day, the second sister has wandered off, quote unquote, gone missing, not run away, but just like wandered off, And the parents are going crazy looking for the second sister. And when the youngest sister like randomly reported that she had had a dream about peaches and blueberries, the mother, whose own mother also had these kind of visions, or the knowing it was called, said, oh, now I know where the second sister is. Sent the father to go down to where the peach orchard met up with the blueberry patch, and in fact there was daughter number 2 like asleep under a tree. So this is what is described, like these kids, little kids would have these visions, would have these senses. It's like if you've seen a little kid who's a really, really good athlete from the age of 3, 4, right? Like the first time they hold a bat, they instinctively know what to do. Or the first time you see these girls who are figure skaters, and they're just certain kids, like from the first time they get on the ice, whether it's a hockey player or a figure skater, they know what to do. It's in their bodies. So they wouldn't have been like this. One of my favorite sports stories in terms of like persistence paying off is about Michael Jordan. I'm dating myself, and I did live in Chicago during the three-peat generation, so, you know, Da Bears, Da Bulls, that's part of my past. But Michael Jordan was not a naturally gifted athlete. Michael Jordan did not make it onto his junior varsity basketball team in high school. And the only way Michael Jordan got good at basketball was literally, he said, he would go home after school and he would practice sometimes 8 hours in a day. And I think it was his junior year, he made it to the varsity, but he certainly wasn't a starter. And it wasn't until he was a senior in high school that he became a starter on his varsity basketball team. And then he went to either Duke or University of North Carolina, whatever the university where that big coach just passed away. I don't remember which one. That was Michael Jordan's college coach. And it was, again, when he first got into college, he wasn't this star athlete. And he wasn't born Michael Jordan. He made himself Michael Jordan. And like the lesson to me was, this story hit me so profoundly because I think as people, and particularly as a high school teacher, we expect like these 14-year-olds to be finished products already, right? We expect them to, or certainly by the time they're 17, and we sometimes despair that if they're not no worries. We actually just started a little while ago. We had some technical difficulties and didn't. Okay, no worries. Yeah, I was going to say, why don't you come sit right here? No problem. So we often feel that, you know, oh, if a kid isn't good at something by the time they're a junior or a senior, or if they haven't like menched out by the time they graduate high school, that, you know, we kind of think of it as, oh, we failed as high school teachers. And then, you know, stop to realize that life doesn't stop at 17. In some ways it only begins. And if a kid is really motivated, what they can accomplish, okay? And this was the case, for example, Eliyahu, we don't know not only do we not know who his father is, but we don't even know what Shevet he was from. There's a three-way machloket about Eliyahu, whether he was a Kohen, namely a reincarnation of Pinchas, whether he was Shevet Gad, or he was from Shevet Binyamin, because we don't know. He was referred to as Eliyahu ha-Tishbi mitoshavei Gilad, and there was more than one Gilad. Gilad literally meant like this kind of mountain, not a mountain, like a hill, like a high hill. And there was more than one of them, just like there are 40 states with a Springfield in the United States. Another random useless piece of information that you could just throw around at the dinner table. But we don't, there's a discussion in the Gemara what Shevet was Eliyahu from, and the very fact that we don't really know what Shevet he was from basically makes him like every man's prophet. But he certainly didn't come from a family of prophets. Okay? So he clearly built himself up into being a prophet. The the best example that we have of kind of prophet in training is Shmuel. So if you have a Tanakh, you can open it to Sefer Shmuel. Divine. I'm joking. Well, here it is. Sefer Shmuel. And we're familiar with the story, but I'm going to repeat it and let's summarize it. Shmuel is born after his mother davens, and Hashem answers her tefillot. And as she has promised, she delivers him into the hands of the Kohen Gadol to basically serve as an apprentice. Shmuel is from a family of Levi, so he is going to be the Levi who is the servant of the Kohen. And then he has, one night, he hears a voice saying, Shmuel, Shmuel. And I think this is the beginning of Perek Bet. I always get confused whether it's Perek Bet or Perek Gimel. Gimel? I think so too, yeah. Gimel is when he gets there. Gimel? Yeah, okay, thank you. I put a pink thing somewhere else, right? So he hears this voice, right, saying, Shmuel, Shmuel. And then he gets up and he runs to Eli and he says, here I am. And Eli was like, I didn't call you. Right? And okay, fine. So Shmuel goes back to bed. And then he hears the voice again saying, Shmuel, Shmuel. And he gets up and he runs to Eli and says, here I am. And now Eli begins to understand what's going on. And he says, okay, go back to bed, and the next time you hear this voice calling Shmuel, Shmuel, say Hineni, which is exactly what happens, right? And Hashem calls to Shmuel, 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 and Shmuel says Hineni, and thus the nevuah begins, Shmuel's stint. Now, what this tells us is a few important pieces of information. Number one, the call of God was something that was discernible, that Eli realized after only one time of Shmuel coming to him and saying, why did you call me, that Eli knew what was going on. One of the ways that the call of God is discernible is by this hallmark double calling, right? Abraham, Abraham, Moshe, Moshe, Shmuel, Shmuel. And there's actually a lot of discussion about why the call has to be twice. And there are two basic answers that are given. One answer, and they're actually the answers that Yosef gives to Paro about why he has two dreams. Anytime something happens twice, you know it's real. Yosef has two dreams, Paro has two dreams, Nebuchadnezzar has two dreams, Hashem calls Abraham, Abraham, Moshe, Moshe, Shmuel, Shmuel. The doubling of something tells us that it's real. And that the other thing, not only is it real, it's not coincidental. The repetition, as opposed to often we think of repetitive as the same thing as being redundant, quite the opposite. In the Tanakh, repetitive is like a stamp of reality. This is not coincidence. A coincidence happens once. Once something happens a second time, it's intentional. So it's real and it's intentional. And Eli obviously knew very quickly that this disembodied voice that Shmuel was hearing, that Shmuel thought was his master calling him, was not a human master, was in fact a divine master. The second thing that this tells us about nevuah is that the voices that a Navi hears in his head and the images that a Navi sees are earthbound voices and images. that the content of prophecy is, and the Rambam talks about this, the content of prophecy is things that are within the realm of natural perception. That it might be weird contortions of things that are natural. Like if you want to read weird prophecies, open up Sefer Yechezkel, and if you want to read weird prophecies that you can actually visualize without making your brain explode, open up Sefer Zechariah. Sefer Zechariah, which is, he's the last prophet, and a lot of his nevuot are very eschatological, which is a fancy way of saying like Mashiach-oriented, and actually there's a lot of Christian art that's based on Zechariah's nevuot, but his nevuot are just fantastical. Like there's no other way. There's one nevuah is about a scroll that's flying. Another nevuah is about a measuring cup with a woman sitting in it with a piece of lead in her mouth. Okay? Another nevuah is the whole nevuah with the menorah and the Kohen Gadol, and the Kohen Gadol is changing his clothes from dirty clothes to clean clothes. I mean, there are horses and bushes, and they're all very, like you could draw pictures of them, but they're very bizarre. But the point is that every single nevuah that a Navi gets that is then described concretely as an image, the Navi perceived in his head as that image, much as we perceive dreams. The difference, and this is what Eli was able to discern that the young Shmuel was not able to discern, is the difference between a dream, meaning a product of the brain, or a product of something real like somebody calling you, and something that's actually coming from the divine. Eli figured that out before Shmuel did. And it looks really, really weird when it's being perceived from the outside. And in Perek Yud of Sefer Shmuel is a really good description of it, because it's where Shaul gets nevuah. And I think we did this. Yes, no, stop me if we did do it, right? Okay, so in Perek Yud, the description is of Shaul getting nevuah, and it just looked really bizarre. And the Rambam describes it as, basically it looks like an epileptic seizure. He loses control if he has been awake. And often this happens when you're sleeping. But if you are awake and if you are in that meditative state that you need to be in for nevuah to happen, then your limbs start shaking and very often your head rolls back and all of these things that basically it looks like you're taking leave of your senses, which you actually are. And this is where the physical training comes in, which goes back to the marathon and the Olympic athlete type of metaphor, is that at the same time that your body is losing control, it's not losing control, it's actually you are consciously letting go of control. And at the same time, when you have basically allowed your mind to leave your body to the extent that your body is actually not functioning completely normally, your mind is so clear and so sharp that it can connect with the abstract. Which is, I guess it's the way my brother-in-law has run some marathons, and I have other friends who've run marathons. It's like that hitting the wall, mm-hmm. right? When you get to that certain point and your body's done. Like it's just done, it can't do anymore. And then you kind of marshal your mental resources and you push beyond the done. So there's almost like this bifurcation of your body is done, but your mind has taken over where the from the body at that point. And Nevuah is described by the Rambam as the same thing. Is that, but this, that your body is out of control, but your mind has stepped in to take control. And at the highest level, you can, like Moshe, you can actually lose control and maintain control at the same time. Which sounds crazy, but from what I have read about Zen Buddhism and about the training that lamas, that Tibetan lamas go through, it's a very similar process. I don't know if you guys remember the movie The Karate Kid, like the old one, not the new one. So that's on a much smaller level. That's a similar kind of process, right? There's tremendous amount of training, right? With the washing the windows, there's this really tremendous training, some of which seems so inane, but then there comes that one moment where everything comes together, and even once your body is bleeding and pushed completely beyond its physical limits, the mind then is able to come and take over and propel you forward. It takes a lot of work, which is why, like, the description, which to me is, I have to laugh every time I read it, the description in Sefer Shoftim, where Manoach's wife gets a vision and has this complete freak out as a result. That makes sense to me then. I mean, it's Sefer Shoftim, it's Perek Yud Bet, chapter 12. And it's the description is, there was this guy, Vayhi Ish Echad Mitzirah, and his name was Manoach, and he had a wife who hadn't given birth, because of course all the women in the Tanakh haven't given birth. That's its own sheer series, right? And she's kind of out and about one day, and lo and behold, in Pasuk, the end of Pasuk Bet, an angel appears to her. Now, imagine yourselves in the Glad Express parking lot, okay, doing your grocery shopping, and all of a sudden, you feel kind of like you're in the movie set, or you look, this candid camera or something like that, and this person appears, like literally out of nowhere. Like, wait a minute, where did you come from? And so this malach appears, and he says to her, and he says, Vayomer Elaha, he says to her, Hinei na at akara, behold, you are barren. Like, how would a random stranger know that? Maybe my kids are at school or at the babysitter. Velo yaladet, right? And you haven't given birth. And then he goes on and he says, V'harit v'yaladet be. You're going to get pregnant, and you're going to have a boy. And then he says, Ve'ata hishamrina ve'al tishti, and that he should be a nazir from his birth, right? He shouldn't drink wine or any other alcohol, and he shouldn't eat anything, come in contact with anything that is ritually impure. And then he says again, Ki hincha hara, that you're going to become pregnant, and you're going to give birth to a son, umora lo ya'aleh al rosho, and that a razor should not touch his head, meaning he's going to ki nazir elokim yihiyeh hanar, because he is going to be sanctified to God, min habeten, from the time that you get pregnant, vehu yachel lahoshia et Yisrael, and he's going to be the savior. At this point, you're like reaching for your cell phone probably, and about to call 911, miyad ha-plishti. Okay. V'tavo ha'isha, she just goes home. Like, this is, sometimes Tanakh is really funny. I'm sorry, it's just funny. V'tavo ha'isha v'tomer le'isha, right? So she gets into her car, she goes home from Glad Express, right? It's the evening, your husband comes home from work, and you say, okay, this really strange thing happened to me. Ish ha'elokim ba'elai. So this is even weirder. She knows that this is not just some regular, ordinary human. Ushmo lo higid. He didn't tell me his name. Like, I'm beginning to think of some, FBI, CIA, whatever type of thing. Vayomer li, and he said, you're going to have a child, and he's not going to be allowed to drink wine and all of this kind of stuff, and he's going to save Israel. And it's Manoach who has the freak out, right? Vaye'atar Noach Manoach et Hashem vayomer bi Adoni ish ha'elokim asher shalach yavo, right? God, you sent this angel to my wife, and maybe she didn't treat him properly, and we shouldn't die. And then she meets the angel again. But clearly this idea of, there was this concept of meeting with an angel unexpectedly, meeting with a prophecy, whether it was an actual physical human or just this, again, like this moment of, like in Field of Dreams, right? When I just showed this to my students, because it is also really an excellent metaphor for the process of prophecy, and how you think you're going crazy, and anyone who doesn't buy into what you're seeing, so to speak, is convinced you're crazy. Go back and watch it. It's really an incredible metaphor. But Manoach knew what was going on, and he was terrified because he knew the stakes, and he was afraid that now his wife is going to be struck down dead because she's done something wrong. So he...
Mechanecha time, 9th and 10th graders in your regular rooms, 11th grade and 12th grade in the Beit Knesset. Let's move quickly to Mechanecha, everybody. Have a good afternoon.
Yay! Okay. So, it did happen. It happened to Yosef, right? According to Rashi, when Yaakov, hang on one second, when Yaakov has sent him to go find his brothers, and he's wandering around, according to Rashi and according to the Medrash, an angel appears to him and says, that way, right? And there are lots of reasons why Rashi brings in that midrash. It's not pshat. I'm not saying that it's pshat, but there's definitely this concept that
the JV Volleyball Championship will be located at Mayano, Sunday night. I will tell you the time soon. Sunday night, Mayano JV Championship against Frisch.
Okay. Yay, tonight's the basketball championship. We're doing well. So there's what, and now I just lost my train of thought. What did I just say? I'm serious, people. What did I just say?
About Yosef.
Yosef, right. So there are a lot of reasons, thank you, why Rashi brings in this midrash. But, and then we know the three people who appeared to Abraham, they appeared in human form. And there's a discussion in the Moreh Nevuchim that you have where he also discusses the line between the angel and the human and the perceived and the real. But again, you have to really be trained mentally to know what you are seeing. It's kind of also learning how to be a research scientist. And, when you look into that microscope and you see those squiggly things and what kind of bacteria are there or what kind of cells are they. This was a learning process. And it was a learning process that required teaching, which we're going to look at in a second. Also, yeah, you had a question.
I think it's interesting. Manoach is a prophet. The angels will come to him.
Right.
So I wonder if he doesn't sound as upset by that, or he's just more nervous that.
My understanding is that he's nervous. My understanding is not that he is not that he is insulted, but that's always been my read, is that he's like, uh-oh, like he knows what the stakes are and he knows what could go wrong. So he's worried that his wife messed something up. He's
11th and 12th graders into the Beit Knesset now, please. Thank you.
He's also worried, what did I do wrong that you came to her and not to me? Like, is this now, did I do something wrong? That this was a sincere fear that he had, knowing what was involved in the job.
And my other question is Chana, do you think that Chana has some kind of nevuah?
So that's a good question. It's not completely clear whether Chana had nevuah or whether it was like a lower level, what we would call Ruach HaKodesh, which is some kind of a divine inspiration or connection, which Eli was able to sense, but Hannah not. In other words, Eli was able to say with authority, your prayers will be answered, you will have a child in a year. And so clearly Eli had this flash of nevuah. The question is whether it was his own flash of nevuah, or whether he was tuning in effect, to some kind of a wavelength that was going on between Hannah and Hashem. And actually, the next thing that I want to show you is a good example of how other prophets could tune in to prophecy frequencies. I know I'm throwing in a lot of metaphors, but it's the best I can do. If you have a Tanakh and you would like, you can turn to Malachim Bet, Kings 2, chapter 2, which is the parak where Eliyahu dies. Okay, so, and it's a really interesting thing that goes on. It's several lessons in and of itself, but I want to kind of stick with the concept of Navi and teaching Navi and how it happens and picking up on wavelengths. So at the beginning of Parak Bet, the Navi states, and it was on the day that Eliyahu died, which is kind of a weird way to present it, but the reason for this will become very evident. And Eliyahu says to Elisha, God has called me to go to Beit El, please stay here. So point number one is that this kind of a conversation between two Nevi'im is not bizarre at all. It's as if I were to say to you, okay, Mrs. Kahan has called me from her office, right? You understand, I'm a teacher, Mrs. Kahan is a principal, there's technology. Number one, she has the authority to call me to her office. Number two, there's technology by which she can communicate with me, or maybe she came and found me. So this was how normative it was. God has come to me and told me to go to Beit El. And Elisha has a very strange response. And he says, I swear, Chai Hashem, as God lives, I shall not leave you. Because Elisha also knows that this is the day that Eliyahu is going to die. And then when they get to Beit El, it says that the B'nai HaNevi'im, and B'nai Nevi'im are Navi students. They are students in Navi school. They are Nevi'im NITs, Nevi'im in training. And they come out and they say to Elisha, do you know that today is the day that your master will die? And Elisha says to them, he literally says to them, shut up, I don't want to talk about it. He says, yeah, quiet. But what's important to take away from and then, by the way, it happens again. He says, Eliyahu says to Elisha, okay, God has told me to go to Yericho, and you stay here. And Elisha says, I am not leaving you. And then he goes to Yericho, and in Yericho, those B'nai Nevi'im, so now we know there are at least 2 Navi institutions, which is pretty remarkable that there are still 2 Navi institutions when Izebel is queen of Israel, and she's on this campaign to get rid of prophets. And we know that Ovadia hid 100 student Nevi'im. So if you start doing the math by, these are the Nevi'im that Ovadia hid, and that was in Shomron, and this is Beit El, and this is Yericho. There are a lot of Navi students out there. Okay, we're talking hundreds at least. And the Yericho Navi students come out and say to Elisha, do you know that your master is going to die today? So there's obviously some kind of news flash coming out of the sky that today is the day that Elisha is going to die. I really didn't mean to rhyme that. I'm sorry, Eliyahu, right. That Eliyahu is, going to die. And that this nevuah, this news flash, was so powerful that even these prophets in training in 2 very different geographical locations got it. And then Eliyahu says, okay. Says to Elisha, now I have to cross the Jordan. He crosses with him, and Eliyahu says, okay, fine, gig's up. Today's the day I'm going to die. What do you want from me? And Elisha says to him, I would like a double portion of your prophecy. And what that teaches us is that when a Navi died, his Nevuah shares were redistributed amongst the rest of the Nevi'im. If you remember last week, we talked about how Moshe's Nevuah was transferred onto the 70 elders. This was one more way in which Moshe was unique, because his Nevuah was transferred while he was still alive, and his own Nevuah didn't diminish. It's likened to a candle, right? You use one candle to light other candles, and that original candle still stays lit. After Moshe died, Nevuah shares could only be redistributed once that Navi no longer had a body to house his soul. So Elisha says to Eliyahu, what I want from you is to effectively be your firstborn, right? Because we know the firstborn gets a double portion of what every other child gets, right? So if a parent dies, leaves $100,000, there are 3 children. I'm really doing this in the easiest form of math possible. Child, the Bechor gets $50,000, and then the other 2 get $25,000. So he's saying, I want a double share, so that I have 1 share more Nevuah than everybody else, so that I should be recognized as your rightful heir. And Eliyahu says to him, he says, Hiksheta lish'ol, you've asked something very difficult. And then he says, if you see me die, then you will get this. And if you don't, you won't. What is Eliyahu saying? If your power at this moment is strong enough so that you have the ability to see me die, to be part of this prophetic experience of my death, then you know that God has given you the stamp of approval and you are my heir. Because when Eliyahu goes up in that whirlwind, Elisha does see it. He says, and the Sefer says, and it was as the 2 of them are talking, right? They're standing there by the banks of the Jordan River in that Glad Express parking lot, by the Jordan River, by that bus stop, and a chariot of fire pulled by horses of fire comes down, swoops Eliyahu up, goes back up to Shemayim, and the only thing that is left of Eliyahu is his cloak, which then Elisha picks up and dons. Now, and it's from here, and it's very appropriate as we get closer to Pesach, that comes the idea, Eliyahu hanavi lo met, that Eliyahu, the prophet, did not die. And as I say to my students, Eliyahu died. By the way, this is also the basis for the Jesus, the whole Christological Jesus going up, coming back. Jesus died. What happened to his body is really up for grabs, but it's really clear that he died. Eliyahu died. But there's obviously something about Eliyahu that remains with us in this world, and the way that Eliyahu died was very much something that is not human. What doesn't get talked about much is that those 50 B'nai Nevi'im from Yericho who are still on the other side of the Jordan River, they saw something happen. They know Eliyahu's gone. But then they spend the next 3 days looking for him, because they see something that probably looked like a tornado. So they also saw this same Nevuah that Elisha saw. They just didn't see it as clearly. It's like fuzz on the television when you don't have that cable channel. right? Or back when we were all a lot younger, when, there was a lot of wind outside and the antenna would move, right? And then the picture would break up, or you tried to get the UHF channel, and I'm really dating myself. But the idea is that clearly what happened to Eliyahu was an incredibly powerful moment in prophecy history. It was powerful enough that all the Nevi'im knew it was going to happen. It was powerful enough that all of the Nevi'im, even these Nevi'im in training, somehow sensed that something had happened, maybe even saw a physical tornado, but only Elisha saw clearly. And from this we can begin to understand what happened at Matan Torah. Right? You had all of Bnei Israel somehow experience God's revelation for those first two Dibrot. They didn't experience it the way Moshe experienced. And there's, I don't remember which parshan at the beginning of Parshat Mishpatim talks about the placement of where you were on the mountain, right? Moshe at the top, and then Aaron and Yehoshua, and then the Zakinim, and then Bnei Israel, back from the mountain, also indicated your level of prophecy. And it also gives us a sense of this idea of why the mountain had to be so protected, because again, if you are in a status where you're having an epileptic seizure and you are not strong enough mentally to control your body, you will die. So when God says to Moses, put a guard around the gate, around the mountain, and when Bnei Israel themselves say, we can't handle this because we're going to die, they weren't being facetious. It's the equivalent of trying to run a marathon or trying to ski a ski race or do anything that is physically so arduous without being properly trained for it. You have a heart attack. Your body just can't do it. Okay? Or similarly, if you don't have the frustration tolerance for delving into the mysteries of the universe, starting to learn string theory will make your mind explode, which is why I never tried to do it. So, let me see what time it is. Oh, good, we can start Moshe. So, now we start segueing to Moshe. Moshe's different. And we know that Moshe's different. So, the question becomes, how was Moshe different and why was Moshe different? So, we know Moshe is different literally from the moment that he's born. Right? So I send you back to Sefer Shemot, Perek Aleph. Perek Bet. And Moshe is born to an Ish Levi and a Bat Levi. And the Ish Levi is Levi's grandson, Amram, and the Bat Levi is Levi's daughter, Yocheved. Okay? So at the very least, we know that Moshe is the grandchild of a Navi. The Gemara tells us that all 12 of Yaakov's children achieved the status of prophet, even if we don't necessarily hear them getting prophecy. So Moshe is born into this, and the Torah tells us that, I think it's Pasuk Bet, I have new glasses and I'm still trying to get used to them. Okay, yeah, so in Batahar Ha'isha, the woman got pregnant, Batelet, she gave birth, Ben, to a child, Batere Oto Kitovhu, and she saw that he was Tov, and I'm not going to translate that word for a second, Batitzbenehu Shlosha Yerachim, and she hid him for 3 months. Now, there's tons of parshanut on this puzzle. But clearly, even at the very, 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 very simplest level, before you look at a single parshan, if you just look at the Hebrew words and what's going on in this pasuk, somehow Yocheved was able to hide this baby for 3 months. That's pretty amazing. Whenever I read this pasuk, I think of the women who somehow managed to be pregnant and have babies in the concentration camps. That's, I can't imagine how that happened. So that there is something divine and supernatural even about the very fact that she was successful, forget about the effort to hide him, that she was successful in hiding him for 3 months. He was really calm, he slept a lot, she obviously had enough milk for him. There was you want to talk about...
He had a good sister.
He had a good sister, right? The stars aligning, whatever you want to say. But there was something already a little bit out of the ordinary with this child.
If she worked, if we believe the Medrashim that she actually worked for the king, so maybe she had some protection.
Yeah, maybe had protection, whatever, but there was clearly something a little bit beyond the norm. He was on that outer edge of the bell curve, even before you get a single miracle in there, right? He's already beating the odds. She's beating the odds. They're all beating the odds. Okay, so that's working from the end of the bus. Then the question is, what does it mean, Vatere oto ki tovu? Because the Rashbam asks it best, and he says, well, every mother thinks that their baby is beautiful. When I used to teach this, I have a great picture of my son, like pretty much from the instant he was born. I was an infertility patient for 9 years, so my son being born was a great event. Of course, the camera had to be there. We didn't video it, but I have this picture of my son, I don't know, minutes old, and we know what newborns look like. They are ugly, okay? I show this to
Mama.
what? But not to mama, exactly, right? There's this little scrawny goat-looking thing covered in slime and blood, and obviously to me, to mama, he's the most gorgeous thing
And
in
he
the world.
is.
And he is, exactly. So this is the Rashbam's question. It's like, what does it mean that she saw that he was good? Clearly the word good here doesn't mean pretty, because objectively babies aren't pretty, and subjectively every baby is pretty, right? So what the Rashbam says is that pretty here, that the word tov means he was complete, that it was healthy. Whether you want to accept the medrash that he was 3 months premature and still healthy, or even, again, you want to go by the pshat without having to go to the medrash and say this was a healthy child. She saw that even though she was a slave, even though she was in really harsh conditions, in a concentration camp, or even, working in the captain of the concentration camp's office, as it were, she gave birth to a healthy child. The Medrash takes it one step further. And the Medrash, which Rashi brings down, says, Nitmale habayit ora. That something, it was clear from the instant of Moshe's birth that there was something different about this child. Whether literally you've got, the sound and the light effect, or whether there was just this sense of peace and calm, or just this knowing, but there was something divine about this child from the moment of his birth. Moshe was born different in a way that his siblings were not. We know that Miriam was also a Nevi'ah. We know that Aaron was a Navi. According to one opinion in the Gemara, the reason Moshe was as great as he was is because Miriam gave up part of her own nevuah, part of her own portion, divine portion, to make sure that he lived. In other words, she didn't just watch over him physically, but she protected him spiritually. I mean, these, again, whether you want to take these midrashim literally or metaphorically is completely up to you. You know, if, I always say, if God can split the sea, then a light can go on in a house, but you don't have to take them literally. They're metaphorically, they're powerful enough. So what the first thing we have to understand is whatever it was that made Moshe was there from the instant he was born. There was a part of Moshe that was different from the get-go. Right? That different, and I'm just going to wrap up here, continued by the fact, Gesundheit, that, you know, he didn't die, that he was saved by Bat Para. And again, like, in case you don't realize the magnitude of that, again, you just have to fast forward to the Nazi metaphor, and it would be literally as if the daughter of the Nazi captain of that particular concentration camp decided to adopt a Jewish baby as her own. That was the magnitude, both of the daughter's actions and of the grander implications that this child was allowed to survive. So there's a lot of really, really powerful stuff going on already from the early moments. And this is what makes Moshe different, is that even a Shmuel, even in Eliyahu, even in Elisha, you know, Moshe's in a category by himself from the get-go, and the Torah makes this really clear. So, okay, we're going to stop here, and next week we're going to get more, kind of deeper into Moshe. We're going to talk about the vision of the sneh. We're going to talk about what happened between, you know, Moshe and Miriam and Aharon, and then maybe even start Navi Sheker, and then the following week finish off with Navi Sheker. Next week, just so everybody's aware, is book day at my note. Hang on 1 second, please. The only reason I'm alerting you to that is, yes, this class will continue. I've alerted the person who's running book day, Ms. Wolf, that I need the library, but there is a chance that we might be somewhere else. So just, you know, kind of keep that in the back of your mind. I'm sure Mrs. Ennis from Japan will kind of put that word out there. We are meeting, there's just a chance that it won't be in here. Okay. And then can somebody hit the button and turn that down? Thank you. Yes?
I have two questions that are not related. The first one is, since we discussed the Nevi'im schools, and there were many, many towns in Israel, but we only hear of the great Nevi'im. So these were lesser Nevi'im.
Yes.
And